Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's Fireside Creators. I am your host, Reverend Dr. Sherry Pallas. I am so excited about this week's show. We are doing the Human Library, and we are featuring Reverend Michele, PhD. She has been a mentor, a friend, and has gotten me through the last 5 years, which have been the most difficult of my life. She has provided insight and love, compassion, friendship, and taught me so much. So I am so glad to hear her full story tonight and to share it with you. If you like the show and want to sponsor it, you can go to my website. One of these days I'm going to get this down. One of these days, maybe when someone else takes over and actually does this for me. But go to Patreon Fireside Creators or Cafe Press. In fact, I'm wearing another one of my shirts today. I feel kind of like I'm not dressed up enough. But look, I always end the show with Walk in Love. And now I have a design that has that at Cafe Press. In fact, you can see some of the shirts there. There are over 150 designs now, different colors, patterns, different topics. And by the end of the week, I will have a new section on banned books that you can go get. I want to thank everybody who currently sponsors the show, which is Ruth, Ray, Michelle, Kirsten, Tim, and Heidi. Thank you so very much. You guys, I can't even believe it. We're almost at a year. Like in 12 days, our first show will have run a year ago. And I am so blessed to have had you guys here in the audience. I've made so many friends. The shows have been wonderful. It has truly been the highlight of my last year. So thank you so much for participating, for watching, for being here for me. So as I say, I'm not talking to myself, but I really, really appreciate you. Okay, let's meet Michele. If you haven't seen her already, she's been on the show a few times. Reverend Michele Sevacko, PhD, is retired, but continues to serve by sharing reflections, music, meditations, spiritual counseling, and more with open-hearted, open-minded, inclusive individuals, groups, churches, and centers. She also facilitates rhythm drum circles. Reverend Michele focuses on New Thought teachings and practices universal principles, celebrating everyone as individualized expressions of the One and honoring all loving paths and people. She identifies as a New Thought, practical and positive Christian, coming from a very diverse background, but is pluralistic in her approach to spirituality. Welcome, Michele. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I am absolutely thrilled to, someone's already given you a shout out on the Facebook user, Michele. So thank you for watching. But I just love you so much. And thank you so much for being on the show. Hey, David, good to see you.
I love you too. And I'm just thrilled to actually, it's like, wow, somebody actually wants to hear more about me. And that I'm not going to bore you to death.
I can't be the only one. I'm sure there's people in the audience. Go ahead and comment about how happy you are to hear Michele's story. I know it's a good one. So I can't wait to hear it.
That's kind of like when you go to speak someplace and they applaud you when you get announced. Yeah. And it's like, oh, I love getting applause before I even do anything.
Exactly, right? Facebook user wants to hear about the drumming, but we will get to that. In fact, maybe you could even post a link in the Facebook group of some of your drumming videos. I know you have a ton.
Oh, I can.
Yeah, let's do that.
I've got quite a few with different groups that I've facilitated.
Yeah, I love it when you're banging on the drum.
Me too.
So Yes, so we can go ahead and put those in there so we can treat everybody with that. Look for that
Okay.
in the Fireside Facebook group. Okay. So right now you are, we just saw Miss Jamie out. Let me go ahead and give a reminder. If you are on Facebook watching, approve StreamYard so we can see your name and we know who we're saying is the comments and the questions. And be sure to like and subscribe and comment on YouTube if you're listening too. Sorry, forgot about that part. I was just so excited about talking to Michele. So, normally I start this at age 8, but we said in the before the show that up until 4, your life had already taken a lot of drama. Do you want to start there?
Sure.
So,
Well,
who were
first
you
of
at
all,
4 years old?
by the time I was 4, I was already on dad number 3.
Wow.
And
now, did you know that these were not your fathers, or
well,
were?
We will get into all that.
Okay.
But my mom had been married, I think, 7 years, and then found out she was pregnant with me, but got a divorce about 3 months before I was born and left Florida, where she had settled with the man that was supposed to be my father, and went back up north to be close to her family. And then when I was 3 months old, she married a man that was several years older than her, that she had known all the way back to when she was 15 years old.
Oh, wow.
I have a half brother from him, but by the time I was 2, they were already getting divorced.
Mm.
And then came Uncle Harry. And she dated Uncle Harry when I was 3. And then when I was 4, Uncle Harry became Daddy Harry. And we moved from the townhouse, or duplex, it actually was, she called it a townhouse, to a big house in the neighboring town that had 3 stories plus a finished basement. So it was pretty big. But it was still, like I only saw the man that was supposed to be the biological father once when I was 2. And the only thing I remember about that is them hollering at each other. And he had a sunken living room. And I was stepping back to try to get away and ended up falling down when I went from the upper part. And so that was like my only memory of him. And then I didn't see him again till I was 12. Oh, wow. And then dad number 2, since my mom had a son with him, he would go to visit him, and I also had to go visit sometimes. So he was kind of part of our lives until then. And then, like I said, she married Daddy Harry when I was 4. And I think I was already starting to feel like, also my mother would take off sometimes and just like wake up in the morning, she'd be gone. And it didn't happen that often, but you never knew when it was going to happen, and when it did, how long it would be for, and where she would end up. One time she took my little brother to Disneyland not too long after it opened. One time she ended up in Florida, another time in Meridian, Mississippi, and you just didn't know where she would be. So I needed, there wasn't the sense of security, I don't think. That it was like, and even with Daddy Harry, he was part owner of a chain of stores that were similar to combining Home Goods with Marshalls. And he would travel a lot on buying trips. And so a lot of times I didn't know if he'd be there either. So my grandmother was the constant in my life. And I shared a room with her. And as I was growing up, she was my best friend. But I think I was already starting to develop some uncertainty and not really trusting that men stuck around. That, like, if you got into a relationship, which I don't think at 4 or 5 I understood relationship, but I understood married because all my friends had married parents, but for some reason I had several. And so I know it created some stuff later on in terms of having trust issues and really believing that a man was really capable of love and, would stick around and stuff.
Did someone show you differently, or did you just heal from that?
In terms of men, I didn't fully trust a man until after I met Chuck, which wasn't until I was 31. And, my generation also grew up with this thing about how it was natural for men to want or need other people and do extra, stuff and have people on the side and, stuff like that. And so that kind of compounded it too.
The acceptance of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But probably the most impactful thing at the age of 4, which I do remember pretty clearly, is that with my mom marrying Daddy Harry, we went from attending Mass occasionally as very loose Catholics to converting to Judaism.
Oh, wow.
And at that time, I thought she was totally a convert. I had no idea that my grandfather, her father, was Jewish. Oh. He had passed on before I was born, and my grandmother never really alluded to it. She would talk about her side of the family and talk about him with a lot of love, but never really talked about his religion. But, like in the mid-50s, the being Jewish wasn't the most accepted thing.
Yeah.
Once I started school, there were kids that could not come home and play with me because we were Jewish. There were kids whose houses I couldn't go to for that reason. Couldn't belong to the country club, different stuff like that. So it made a major change to convert to Judaism, but I embraced it, as my mom would say. I was a good little yid. I loved going to temple. I loved the high holidays. And years later, when I ended up, or decades later, when I ended up being ordained, my mom was happy about it, but I think had wished that I had not gone off on a New Thought Christian path, and also was kind of surprised that I ended up taking that step. And I had to remind her that you can see necklaces of me from when I was 2 and 3 years old wearing a gold hand of God, which I still have in my jewelry box. And I said, you set me up for it. All my life, I was like a spiritual quest and stuff. But I did go to Hebrew school 3 times a week for 5 years. Remember 3 or 4 words, lack of use. And so that's pretty much how it was being 4.
Facebook user asked, did you understand why at the time? And I'm not sure what that question is pertaining to. Can you clarify, Facebook user? Understand why at the time she converted? Maybe?
Oh, yeah, because Daddy Harry was Jewish.
Mm.
And so she converted for him so that, which I'm not really sure why either, except that my mother had no particular belief system. So, I mean, like around the
Wow.
time I met Chuck, she was hoping that I was going to get together with her rabbi who had expressed interest in me after he and his wife got divorced. And I was like, but Mom, we've got a major, difference here. And she's what? And I said, I'm a Christian. And she said, well, I don't see why that has to matter. And, to her, it didn't matter. You just kind of went with the flow.
I like that.
Yeah.
The question was, did you understand why the anti-Semitism was at your age? I mean, I would guess that it was right after the war, so there was still a lot of that going
Well,
around.
it was, starting, I was born the end of 49. So the kind of her conversion and us adapting to that started in 1954. And I could remember, in fact, it came up very much for me and was scary and sad when Trump was in office. Because there were things that were going on that reminded me so much of hearing my mom and Daddy Harry and friends of theirs sitting around the table and talking about, most of them had either family or friends that had been killed in the Holocaust. And they would talk about how this will never happen again. That, we would not let this ever happen again. And when Trump was in office, I was so afraid that exactly that was going to end up happening again. Not necessarily to Jewish people, although that was a possibility, but any people of color, just anybody that wasn't white, it seemed like.
Well,
So,
statistics show that anti-Semitism has skyrocketed, and I think I just heard that it hasn't been this high since right after or during World War II. So,
well, and I do believe that, again, just like, the stuff with Trump, that wasn't anything new. That's something that's been sitting there and just kind of festering.
Yeah.
And just ended up bubbling up and boiling over. And I think that's the same case. It's always been there. It just was laying below the surface. And that gave a lot of opportunity to be like, yeah, this is who we are. So,
user just said he gave haters permission.
mm-hmm.
And that, yes.
Yeah.
Fact,
and later on,
let's silence them again.
I mean, we would have, even like when you talk about living in Miami, which we moved to when I was 10. So I'm just going to kind of jump ahead a few years because, Lord, you don't want to go year by year. But my mom had wanted to move back to Miami. And so we moved to Miami Beach for about 6 months. While she was looking for a house down in the more tropical areas. And usually people associate Miami, at least from the late 50s and 60s, as being a lot of Jewish population,
Yeah,
which it was. But when we moved down to the area that we ended up settling, suffice it to say that one of the two closest high schools was South Dade Rebels, and they flew a rebel flag. They had, lots of people flew them, had Confederate things out there.
Yeah.
We would end up with the big posters out on our front. We had double doors going in, and they would post them there and say things like, or they would glue a bunch of cockroaches on it and say, you're a cockroach, or draw a big picture. And there was a lot of things that were done going into the 60s and into the mid 60s, even down here with us, because we were an exception in that area. So
I'm
the
so
picture
sorry.
you're looking at here, though, I was 8, and that was the age that you said that you usually
I usually
start
start
with.
with, we've got too much with you.
Well, my grandmother was training me to be a princess. She
Oh,
had decided that if Grace Kelly could be a princess of Monaco, that there was absolutely no reason that I couldn't also be a
well, there you
princess.
go.
So here is one of my in training pictures.
I love it.
Chuck had been going through and was like emptying all my mom's old albums and putting stuff into the computer, scanning it in. And so I shared this just a few days ago or so on Facebook. But yeah, so at that time, that was my princess time. And at that point, as well as going to Hebrew school, I was also going to dancing school Friday evenings and Saturday mornings, and taking piano. And my grandmother, who had been trained as an opera singer, was trying to give me voice lessons, but I usually wanted to just kind of fool around and do things that would crack her up. Because I just always enjoyed making her laugh, because when my mom was around, we had to be real serious. Everything was very serious with her.
So I just love this picture because you being a princess is just so perfect, because even though you're looking up, it looks like your whole face is saying, get down, worship me. I am the princess. What are you doing above me? I just love that look of yours.
Yeah, I look at it and I'm like, I have this seriously.
Yeah, you have this, you own it. I love it. So 12 and 13 were big years for you, a couple years
Yes.
after. What happened there?
Well, Daddy Harry died when I was either 11 or 12. He was supposed to join us in Miami after he took care of business and got things settled up with his partners, and that just didn't happen. He ended up having a heart attack and stroke at the same time, left him completely paralyzed on one side. And so he had constant care where he was up in New Jersey. And we went up to see him once. And then the next thing I knew, Mom was divorced. And
divorce,
I blamed it on her. I'd never told her I did, but I blamed it on her for years and thought she had left him when he needed her the most. And then I found out, because she had a letter from him that said so, that he had said he was 16 years older than her. And he told her that she was still young enough and beautiful enough that she could get remarried, and he wanted a divorce. He didn't want to burden her.
Oh, wow.
And stuff. And that, so that it just kind of broke my heart.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad that I had never said anything to her about it or accused her. If I had, I probably wouldn't have lived to tell about it. But so then she remarried when I was 12, and he was Catholic. So guess who went back to Catholic? And we started attending Mass. And we did it for a little while, not very long, because there was a missionary that came to speak one week, and he talked about how if you had one coat, you needed to give one away. My mom, we lived in Miami, but she had minks and all different kinds of furs. And she was really upset. She was like, I worked hard for these coats. I'm not giving any away. She said she wasn't going to go back.
Oh, wow.
And I wanted to continue going. That I felt something when I went to the Mass. So I asked her if I could go with a friend of mine, and she said, sure, as long as I don't have to drive you. If they're willing to take you, you can go with them. So I did that for probably part of a year. And then was Vatican II. And with Vatican II, changes came. there was a difference in the way you still couldn't eat meat. I think it wasn't every Friday. I don't think it had
was
changed.
Friday, meatless Fridays.
We had linguine with clam sauce every Friday for years, unless my mom sold the house. Then we got frozen breaded shrimp as a treat. But there were things that changed. And I realized at that time, as young as I was, that if rules can change, they're man-made rules. Mm-hmm. I wanted to know what the God rules were. And so I basically went to my mom and told her that exact thing. I want to know. I said, I know there's God's laws. There's got to be things that work for everybody all the time, anywhere. And I want to look for that. And she said, that's fine. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about being Jewish was the philosophy about asking questions and experiencing and stuff. Whereas the Christians that I had gotten to know were like, no matter what denomination they were in, that was the right denomination. Mm-hmm. None of the other ones, where you need to be Baptist, you need to be Pentecostal, you needed to be Methodist. No, you need to be Catholic. That's the one holy, true church and stuff. So she did actually encourage me and give me permission, but she herself had done some studying of Buddhism and a little bit of mysticism. And I should have mentioned that my grandmother had grown up with a mother who was Catholic, but her father was a theosophist. So basically, he embraced everything, and believed that as long as it was God, it was all good, that there was none that was better than the other. So that's how she had grown up. And with me sharing a room with her and being so close to her, she talked to me a lot. So I had these things instilled. And I think if there's one gift that I really value and appreciate my mother for, it is that in her eyes, all religions were good, all races were good, all cultures were good, LGBTQ plus people were good. She absolutely accepted everybody. And so I grew up in an environment where everybody was accepted. And we had a lot of family members by marriage and then by birth that it fit into all those different slots. And it was an unusual, I felt like we were a very eccentric family, and we were to some degree, also somewhat, what's that other word? Dysfunctional.
Conservative.
But we, you know how you don't talk about Bruno, we don't talk about dysfunction. And people say all the time that there's, they're like, well, somebody's got to be that everybody's dysfunctional to a certain degree.
Agreed.
But I say somebody's got to be functioning if there's dysfunction. Otherwise, there's no purpose for dysfunction. But
we can't have dysfunction without fun, though, right?
Right. You put the fun in dysfunction.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which the way I did that was to go to the local liquor store before we were making a trip down there as an adult, as I would call it, our trip to Dysfunction Junction.
There you go. So let's skip to 18 and 19. Is this
also a pivotal time? That one I'm actually like 12, 13 in.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, you go, girl.
Yeah.
I never would have guessed that you were a preteen at this age, in this
Yeah.
picture. Wow.
I don't think the chest was my own, though. I think it came with the bathing suit.
Those paddeds, I remember those.
And I had to put this picture in here because I love that dog so
I
much.
was just going to say, tell me about the dog. I got to know
He
about
was
the dog.
that was Stardust. He was our little Italian greyhound.
Uh-huh.
And he loved to dress up. So here he is in his kind of cheetah garb with his Hollywood sunglasses and a hat on.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, he had that. He had a green beret outfit, Santa Claus, Cleopatra. We've got movies from around this time period of us trailing around him, and my stepfather is paddling him on a raft so that it's like his barge. And then there's a half a dozen of us in Cleopatra looking garb or Egyptian looking garb that are back behind him as his entourage.
That's great.
Yeah, that's part of the eccentric.
So I can't help but notice the fist clenched in this picture. Was it stress? Were you
I probably didn't want my picture taken. There was a lot of photography that went on. That was my grandmother's hobby. And so she was constantly taking pictures. And I probably was just tired of it that day.
Okay, so 1819. Tell me about
that should be
phase.
1819. That one is older.
Okay.
Did I send them to you in the...
I'm doing them according to order, but we don't have to match the pictures. I can remove that.
Okay, well, that one was from when I was about 25.
Okay, so tell me about 1819 first.
I had been engaged to a boy in college. We were supposed to be getting married January of 69. And in October of 68, around the middle of the month, he told me that he needed to sow some oats, basically. And in his mind, I would end up sitting around waiting a little while he did that. In my mind, I was like, I'm over you.
Good for you.
And I met my ex right before Thanksgiving, but didn't really meet him. I moved into an apartment with a girl that I worked with at the university, and he came over and he said, I know it takes weeks to get your phone. If you need to borrow a phone, just come knock on my door. And so a few days later, I went over to borrow his phone, call my grandmother for something. And then after I got off the phone, we sat around and talked for like 5 hours.
Oh, wow.
And then I had a date that night and he had plans. And he said, if you hear my music on, because back then the walls in the apartments were like paper thin. You always heard your neighbor's music. He said, come on over. So I went on over and we talked, we danced. He said, I don't want you to leave. And I said, okay, go next door and get my stuff. And he did. And 5 days later, he proposed. And so I was 18 still, going on 19. And we got married. We knew each other a month the day after we got married. And that,
wow.
And I turned 19 the day before we got married. So that's why it was, an important time.
1819. Yeah.
And
so how long were you married?
12, 13 years.
Wow.
And we separated once right before our 10th anniversary. I left.
Wow.
And then ended up reconciling several months later. And then we stayed together another year and a half or so. I kind of, all the time kind of runs together. Right about the time I met Chuck, I was leaving him again. And
it's just surprising after getting married after a month that a relationship would have lasted that long. Kudos to both of you.
Well, the you had like 25 as one of the kind of milestone things. At that point, I realized that I enjoyed his company when other people around. We had people coming and going from our house all the time, had different people live with us for different times. And I was really content when I had other people around. But he and I had some big differences. Like I knew that he had grown up in a Methodist family. He went to a Methodist college. His uncle was Methodist preacher, and we got married where he came from because his father couldn't make the trip, which was Poplar Bluff, Missouri, and that's a whole other story. And but I thought he's religious, that he's a Methodist, he's Christian. Found out after we got married, he wanted nothing to do with the church. He said it had been shoved down his throat his whole life and he wanted nothing to do with it. So I would come and go, like with neighbor friends and stuff, and he didn't have a problem with that. But he also wasn't supportive of my commitment to doing things. So that was a biggie. And then the second one was that I was told by two different doctors a couple years apart that they didn't think that I would ever have a baby, that I'd ever be able to get pregnant unless I took fertility pills. And
I'm a little bit shocked. And both of us have one child.
Well, and they said that if I did, that would almost guarantee that I would have 5 or 6, and that it would lose at least 1 or 2. And the second doctor that talked about it, my ex said, I wanted a baby, not a litter. So that was a no-go.
Wow.
And so then I started talking about adoption. And his family was very much against adoption. They were like, you have no idea what you're going to get. You're just letting yourself in for problems down the road and stuff like that. And we want our blood carried on. And I'm like, well, give the kid a transfusion. Problem solved. And, but, that was a biggie. Yeah. So, and then the third thing was that he seemed to think that it was okay that if he was off flying or doing something and I wasn't around, that it was okay to basically hook up with other people, that it had nothing to do with love. It was just about sex. That's how men are. They have their needs. The thing.
Yeah, the 500-mile rule I've heard of. It's 500 miles, you're married.
Except it could have even have just been, it might have been close to 500. I'm thinking it was probably closer to 300 one time. But so that was something else that we did not have in common.
No.
And by the time he got to the point, finally, though, where he said, okay, I'll go to church with you if it means that much. And I'm like, you don't go because, you have to. You go because that's what you want to do. And he was willing to look into adoption. And it was just like, it's, too little too late. So that just didn't work out. But then, like I said, right about that time I met Chuck, who was recently separated from his wife and working down in Macon. The
So tell me about
company
this girl.
sent him down. That I was 25 there. We were in Northern California at he had a 6-month thing at Mather Air Force Base to learn to become an electronic warfare officer, my ex. And then after that, we moved to Fort Walton Beach for him to do work out of the base that was there. And am I looking a little bored or what?
Yeah. Like,
my grandmother came out. I didn't mention before, but after I got married, my grandmother lived with us half of the year and with my mom half of the year. And so, I loved having her company.
It's so sweet that you had her support.
Yeah. Yeah. If I'm the least bit normal, whatever that is, sane, balanced, any of those things, it's due to my grandmother. And she was also my example of love.
Aww.
She didn't judge. She didn't put conditions on things. She just loved. And it was through her that I developed that philosophy of that if there are conditions with it, it's something else trying to masquerade as love.
I love that. I love that so much that she was here. I missed this picture and I wanted to show it, that you were obviously a young teenager.
That's the one from 18, 19.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's skip to 31.
And that is the year I met Chuck.
Okay. And you met Chuck at a party.
Mm-hmm. Valentine party. And a couple friends that his company that he worked for in Pittsburgh had sent down a bunch of people to work on a power plant in Macon, Georgia. They were building a power plant. He was one of the engineers. And
sorry, my pictures all just shut down, so we just lost those. Sorry about that.
It's okay. And
Chuck's picture blew up my service. That's a chest.
So through friends that lived next door to me, I met other people that were also from the company and got to be friends with them. And then one of those couples had a Valentine party at the clubhouse, and Chuck had just come down from Pittsburgh and he had been invited to the party. So like my mom and my stepfather, who I call my step grouch, who was number 5 and 7 in her chain of marriages, and my grandmother were there visiting me. And the first time Chuck saw my grandmother, she was already 90.
Oh, wow.
And she was dancing with a 21-year-old boy at this party. And I have a picture that I had posted Valentine's Day on my page, but I was wearing a burgundy dress, burgundy hose, burgundy suede heels, and looking very proper and stuff. Walked over to where the bar was, and I'm holding a roach. Can you say that?
Sure.
Holding it between my long nails. Went to take a hit off it and sucked it in.
A bug. She's talking about a marijuana.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
And so his introduction to me was seeing me holding this and looking very ladylike and then sucking it down. And he cracked up. And I don't think we chatted much that night. But the next day, we all went over to that same couple's apartment and started talking, getting to know each other. And that was February 14th that we met. And then between there and May, we only did things with groups of people. Mm-hmm. The guys that he worked with and girlfriends or wives, or some of them were just single guys. And so we would do things like go to the beach, which is this picture, or go bowling, go dancing, whatever. And then we had our first date in May. And then he left to go back up to Pittsburgh in I think either the end of July or beginning of August. And then I ended up joining him there a couple months later in October. And then we were together from then on till when we got married, August of 82.
Well, this is definitely the most happiest out of all the pictures that you sent. Love that smile.
Oh, thanks. I was having a good time, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, okay, you're not on the beach, right? So 31, you guys get married?
When I was 32.
32, okay.
Yeah.
You guys look at this picture. Isn't
Yeah.
that great?
Now I'm about
Michelle's
40 in
idea
this
to send
one.
these pictures, and I just loved the idea. So if you're on another human library, I'm going to ask you to send pictures because this was a phenomenal idea. I love seeing the pictures that go along with the different ages.
Yeah, I was right about 40 here.
Okay.
And that was an important time because, well, first of all, we did end up having a baby. And it wasn't that there was anything wrong with my ex, because his girlfriend got pregnant the same time I got pregnant. So there was nothing wrong with either of us. We just weren't meant to be.
Okay.
But had my miracle baby a couple months before I turned 34. And I was a stay-at-home mom and very much involved in volunteer work. And all I had ever really wanted to do and spend most of my time doing was living a life of service. And so I was heavily into volunteer work at this period, and had a friend of mine's sister who I had only met once or twice, ended up nominating me to be president. The old President Bush had a points of light thing. And she ended up, without me knowing, writing up all the different stuff I was involved in and nominated me. So I have what we call my validation wall that has my letter from the President and Mrs. Bush and interviews that were in the local Pittsburgh papers and stuff.
That's
and
awesome.
I got to go around, like some of the women's clubs and stuff would ask me to come and speak to them about all the different things I was doing and stuff. And that, we've had a lot of happy times, but that was a very happy and fulfilling time. And
Chuck always supported your spiritual path, evidently.
Yes. He
that helped.
and he was Catholic. If you asked him what religion he is, he'd probably still say Catholic, even though he hasn't been in a church in years. But we went to Mass together. And then at one point when I was about 36, I started realizing that I would look at people when it was time to, say different prayers and stuff like that. And it was like watching zombies. Everybody was just saying things rote. And I sat there, and the one Sunday, it was time for communion. And we said, Lord, I am not worthy to receive you. And I could only get that far. And in my head, I was like, I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. That just didn't sit well.
Yeah.
And so I ended up where we would go to the Catholic holy days, to any Mass that was going on, not every day, but didn't miss one when I was pregnant, delivered, or anything. But I found myself, being like, oh, I'm not feeling real good this morning. I think I'll just stay home and rest, kind of thing. And I sat on the sofa.
When they're telling you you're a piece of shit, why would you
I sat there stretched out on the sofa watching some kind of a service on TV. I remember that they sang "There Is a Balm in Gilead" as one of their songs, because that was one of my favorite hymns from back when I belonged to the Methodist Church, because we totally skipped over that, but I had been confirmed Methodist when I was 20 or 21. But I sat there and I did my best Scarlett O'Hara, shaking my fist at God and saying, there's got to be more than this. And the next day in the paper, our local paper, I saw an ad for a Unity study group for a metaphysical Bible study. And I was like, oh, maybe that'll make sense, because reading the Bible as it's written sure doesn't.
Yeah.
And started going to their classes and did my best to make sure they weren't aliens. I seriously would look at them, and make sure, because the things that they were saying were the things that my grandmother would talk about and we would talk about together, but I didn't know anybody else thought like that or anything. And it was like, oh my gosh, these are my people. And when I got home that night, I announced to Chuck, these are my people. And he said, notice you don't say you fit right into the group. You say, these are my people.
There you go.
And I went to classes for about 6 months and ended up, the minister had left, the licensed Unity teacher became the interim minister. So she couldn't lead the outreach anymore. And make a long story short, we started doing a course in miracles. I said I would facilitate it, but it's a book where everybody's the teacher and everybody's a student, basically. Yeah. And so they announced at the service, it was like the first or second service I'd ever been to, and the platform chairman says, I'm happy to announce they have a new leader for the South Hills Outreach. And I was like, oh, good. And then I hear my name announced. And I was like, I didn't do that, and then went home and told Chuck. But that basically started me on facilitating spiritual support groups and classes and study groups and stuff like that. And it really ended up being, that was totally where my heart was. And just started, even though I said I did not have any intention of becoming a minister, I loved being supportive of whoever the ministries were that are in place in the few places that we had moved to. But I had no intention, but I kept feeling a calling. And then, it's like when somebody calls you, you have a choice. You can either answer the phone or you can hang up. I wouldn't answer the phone. But then it became a summons. And if you don't answer a summons, you get in trouble.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I'm going to go through this course of study. I had already had 20 years of classes, courses, and studying. So I said, I'm going to go through this, but I'm doing it for personal growth. I have no intention of, actually doing ministry. Got finished with the course of study and got ministers' reports in the mail to do monthly. And I was like, oh, you mean I'm actually supposed to do something? I wasn't planning on that. And then had to figure out what I was going to do. So as of, that was 2008.
Okay.
That I finished that up. So that's when I got ordained. And then basically realized from the website that I had that all I needed to do was kind of change my name, because I was going to continue to do what essentially boiled down to alternative ministry and do the same things as a minister as I had been doing as a person. Was still going to do I think the only difference was that I could do spiritual counseling after I went through the program, where before I could give friend advice if they wanted it, but that was about it. But I had been trained to do small group ministries, had been trained to do mediation, and just several different things, so I just continued doing those things. Plus, I had started writing songs and music and had started going around to some different Unity and different New Thought centers and churches and sharing those and doing the rhythm circles, which I called them rhythm circles instead of drum circles, because that was at a point where drum circles had started getting very rigid. Leaders would start the beats, everybody would follow the beats. It really gave no room for creativity. And I wanted it to be a creative experience where you could drum whatever it was you were feeling. And so I called it Rhythm in the Round, actually, and then started as things loosened up with the drum circles, then started incorporating that. But at the rhythm ones, you could bring other instruments, you could dance around and stuff like that. And it just is a good time and a creative time, and good for building community. We would do community building exercises during them and stuff too.
Well, I wouldn't be who I am without you. And you turning me on to the Unity churches and the education and everything enabled me to have this as my church. So I absolutely love you for doing so. One of the things that we haven't touched on, we're almost at the top of the hour, that one of my favorite things, and I think this picture kind of says it, is that when you got cancer, you realized that you had no control over everything, and your hair helped you realize that. Will you tell that story?
Well, that really was, I used to have, well, you can see kind of my hair there, but I think I actually had set it. If I let it dry naturally, it was curlier than yours. And so I went from that to where the oncologist had told me when I met with her that she said, you have no control over what's going to happen from here on out with your treatments, how you react to them, and all these other things. She said, the one thing that you can control is your hair. You can decide, she said, the kind of chemo you're using, it's going to be gone, no doubt. But you can decide, when you want it to go, whether you want to do it, in a week or in 2 weeks or whatever. You have a little time. Well, it was either the next day or 2 days later that I was walking through the bedroom and realized I also had fairy hair, which were silk threads in different colors that had been woven into my hair. So I sparkled when I was under light or in the sun. And
how appropriate.
I found it, a bunch of it just laying on the floor, not realizing that it had come out. And I grabbed my head and just kind of went like that, and out came another handful. And that's when I realized I couldn't even control my hair. And with that recognition, I thought, how could I ever try to control somebody else if I can't even control my own hair? And it's kind of, whenever I'm tempted to go in and try to do some controlling, it's like, you can't even control your hair. You're not going to be able to control them. And as you can see, it came in straightish, thin where it used to look more like that. But I've learned to live with it, even though I sometimes have to ask myself when I see myself in the mirror, who are you?
You are
But
a
the answer is
beautiful
always
soul.
a perfect child of God, created in that image.
Exactly. I love you so much, and thank you so much for doing this. We didn't get to 60, but I think you got everything. And do you have any final words?
For you young people out there, the older ones already know this, but for you young people, time flies whether you're having fun or not. So do your best to have fun. Stay in the moment, enjoy every moment, because you never know what's going to come up later on today or tomorrow. And above all, if you care about somebody, let them know you care about them. Spread love.
I love that. And I love you. Thank you
Love you
so much,
too.
Michele.
You
You
are
have been
welcome.
a light in my life that has created nothing but blessing. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
I'll catch you backstage.
Okay.
Well, that hour flew. I just love her so much, and I hope that you see why. She is just a light and a changing, charging force in so many people's lives that brings joy and peace and love. She's just amazing, right? So I'm so glad that she got a chance to meet all of you and for her to share her story. David, I have to ask Michele. Things have been kind of crazy, so I'm not sure if we're going to do an after show, but if we do in the VIP, I'll send you a link. Next week's show is on anger and how to process it, how to be angry and not mean, how to do anger right, so you're not hurting others, because that's all that matters. So tune in next week. I will be looking for a panel for that. So if you want on it, let me know. I love you guys. And as the shirt says, walk in love this week. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.